There is much more to this than we initially thought, as we have a new report surrounding John Tavares revealing some very interesting contract details. So to break that down in this episode, as well as discuss some comments that John Tavares made that has Leafs fans fired up, as it seems like he is poised to have one of the best seasons in recent memory. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get to it, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. If you're part of the 70 or so percent who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself. We're trying to hit 13,000 subscribers before opening night, which is a week from today. If you want to help us towards that goal, hit that button. But Darius, a lot to go over today. Obviously, John Tavares, he is flying over the radar a little bit because of all the other things that are happening, whether it's Nick Robertson, Mitch Marner, all those things are starting to quiet down now as the Leafs prepare to play the Montreal Canadiens 1 week from today. And we have some new reports revealing some contract details, which is something that's actually going to be very important throughout this entire year, specifically because this is, of course, the last year of his contract, and he's not getting any younger, so the contract is going to be interesting. But let's just dive right into it. There's a bunch of things to discuss today, so we can start by what he had to say. So he obviously opened his availability by reiterating his support for Austin Matthews' new captaincy, kind of his first time speaking out on it since it was transferred over to Austin. And he basically just had a bunch of good things to say here surrounding his contract, surrounding everything. He says he wants to be a Leaf and he wants to be a Leaf long term. Hopefully that will happen. And basically, let's start with that, Darius. Obviously, a report came out for Frank Saravalli as well, which we'll get into in a minute here, basically discussing the fact that John Tavares is most likely going to be a Toronto Maple Leaf for the rest of his career, and that the Leafs are working on a deal with him. But just from John Tavares himself, he came out and said, hey, I want to be a Toronto Maple Leaf for life. And it makes sense at this point, even though it's going to be a hefty pay cut from what he's making this season.
Yeah, I think he knows that too, and I think he's going to be open to that, right? And we haven't really had a chance to talk about John Tavares because, like you said, Nick Robertson and all these new acquisitions, we got to talk about them, and they've been making the news. And Tavares has just quietly come in here with the assistant captaincy and done his stuff, right? Just done his job and been who he is this whole time. But yeah, like you said, I believe he wants to be here for the rest of his career until he retires, and I think that's fine because he's still a very good player at what he does. He's still a great face-off guy. I think he's the best face-off guy on the Leafs still. And, yes, he's getting older, but, he is underrated in the corners. I think a lot of people overlook that. He's a good battler. He wants to win in the playoffs, right? And I wouldn't hang much of their playoffs failures on him specifically. No way. And I think he's been a pretty good captain. I know a lot of people don't like the robotic thing, but he's very even keel. And I think that is important at times if you're a captain. So, I thought that the transfer of the captaincy was all class from John Tavares as well. And you know what? He fully supports Austin Matthews and he's ready to take on a new role with the Toronto Maple Leafs as the assistant captain, right? And kind of stepping back, but still being who he is and being able to, have that leadership quality and help younger guys and new guys who come into the team. So different role from this year. I think he's going to have a great season. I think the pressure's kind of off his shoulders in a way because he's not the captain anymore. So I think he's ready to have, like you said, one of the better seasons in recent memory for himself. And it should be pretty exciting. He's driven to win and he looks pretty good in the preseason so far, obviously dealing with an injury. We'll have an update on that and his contract in, later on in the video as well.
Yeah, and obviously the fact that he wants to be a Leaf for life is super exciting if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. We kind of knew this was going to happen. He's done nothing but good things since he's been with Toronto. Obviously, he hasn't helped the Maple Leafs win multiple series or win a cup or anything like that. But like you mentioned, it hasn't fallen on him, just him. Obviously, it's a lot of different people. And from John Tavares, he spoke out on the new coach, of course, Coach Craig Berube. He's a straight shooter, but also is someone who is fun to be around. And a bunch of things were just coming out about John Tavares. And obviously, there's a bunch of different things up at the cottage and all these things that they're doing. But Johnny comes out of his shell once in a while. He lost his shell when he saw that game. And that was basically on the bonding trip and what's going on. Now, some good news regarding injuries. So, John Tavares and Cal Yarncroc are expected to participate in the Maple Leafs' next practice after dealing with injuries. So they are coming back, Darius. They're going to be back and they're healthy now, which is another good sign. So there's a lot of good things that are happening here. And we have some quotes that I want to get into because this is super interesting here. So the first one, I'm as driven as I've ever been to contribute. So, I mean, again, he's not getting any younger. He's definitely not getting any younger. But the point is that he seems to, and it seems like this is kind of a common theme. Now, whether that's because they lost again, whether it's because they finally, maybe some of the players feel guilty for Sheldon Keefe getting fired, whatever it ends up being, a lot of these players follow this similar kind of regime of I'm going to work as hard as I can, get in the best shape of my life, and finally win a playoff game or multiple playoff games, multiple playoff series in Toronto following another brutal loss last year.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of pressure on the shoulders of the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he doesn't have that anymore. Like I said, he's still going to be a leader and talk to the media and all that stuff. He still has to show up to the rink and be who he is and be a big part of the team, and he has to contribute, right? But his role is diminishing this year a little bit. Yes, he still makes the $11 million, but the pressure is starting to kind of subside a little bit for him. So I feel like he might be able to play more freely. He's not who he was 10 years ago or even just a couple of years ago. He is getting older, like you said, and some of the things he can do are kind of going away. And he is still very good in front of the net. And like I said, battling in the corners and face offs and stuff like that. He has a lot of value to the team. So I do believe he is really driven to come in this year. He knows the clock is ticking on his time specifically, maybe not the Maple Leafs as a whole, because a lot of the younger guys are just coming into their prime now, but he knows the clock is ticking for himself and he wants to win. So he seems driven, seems like there is a bit of pressure off of his shoulders as well. So that might be a recipe for success this year, especially in his new role. Looks like he's going to be the third line center as of right now. Things can change, and we've talked about that in videos yesterday in the last couple of days. But looks like he'll be the third line center and transitioning into a new era of being a Toronto Maple Leaf for himself.
Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see what happens. Now, let's dive into the report quickly. Obviously, we know that John Tavares wants to stay in Toronto, but Frank Saravalli came out and said some interesting things. He said he's just gonna take a huge haircut in pay and play. So that's about as blunt as you can get surrounding anything regarding a report here. So we know that obviously he's not gonna be making the $10 million that he was making in the past or making this year, but what he is going to be making is up. We don't know for sure yet. Probably 3-4 million, something at a severe pay cut, because we know that this year he's probably coming in rocking the third line center, and he is going to be getting technically overpaid this year for that. But the Leafs didn't sign John Tavares that contract for the last year, and for him to be elite at that number. But it's interesting that Saravalli comes out and kind of confirms he's going to take a huge payday, and that coincides with John Tavares himself saying he wants to be a Leaf for life. And I think John is smart enough to know that that's probably only going to happen if he takes somewhat of a haircut when it comes to pay, at least compared to what he had before.
Yeah, and he's going to have to, right? If you want to be a Toronto Maple Leaf, at the end of the day, it's a business. This player is 34 years old, and when he signs a contract, whatever many years it is, if it's 2 years or 3 years, at the end of it, you're going to be 36, 37. So the Leafs have to think about it that way. Like you got to take a pay cut, or you're going to go somewhere else. We're not going to re-sign you because we'll find somebody else who will do it for cheaper, even though he's a valuable part of the team. But I don't see him doing that. I think he wants to retire a Maple Leaf, and he's probably going to do what's best for the team at this point in his career. He's made his money, right? And he seems pretty content with that and wanting to be a Maple Leaf, which is fine. I think he's a great player still, and he'll continue to be a good player in that role, like you said, third line center for the foreseeable future for a couple more years after this one. I think he'll retire Maple Leaf, which is fine. I'm a big fan of John Tavares. Obviously, his jersey is behind me, and would like to see him retire a Maple Leaf and a Stanley Cup champion, hopefully. But I think John Tavares, if anyone, will do the right thing for the Maple Leafs, take a pay cut, still get paid for what he is at that point. I'm not saying he's going to sign for league minimum at this point in his career, but still get paid for what he is, but a significant pay cut that'll allow them to use that salary cap space to sign other guys like maybe Matthew Nyes, who needs an extension as well. So we might get an answer on that pretty soon, I think. I'm not sure this is something where both parties have to wait till next offseason. I think, no matter how Tavares' season goes, nothing changes the fact that he is getting older and his role with the team looks like what it looks like now. So I do think it could get done, either right before the season starts, which there hasn't been too much about that, or during the season. I think it's very possible because it's not a Mitch Marner situation or Igor Shesterkin in New York or something like that, right? I could see it happening during the year. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I think you'll have a good year this year.
Yeah, and also, of course, similar to the Matthew Nye situation, maybe they get both of these done very, very soon. And one other note, John Tavares and Calle Crocker on the ice for practice here in Bracebridge. Both have been out with lower body injuries. Like I mentioned earlier, they are returning from injury, and they actually are practicing today as they prepare for what's going to be probably a battle a week from today against the Montreal Canadiens. So make sure to stay tuned. Hit the subscribe button as well. We're trying to hit 13,000 subscribers, and we'll see you guys later. We also have a stream tonight.